start out with is just sort of an update, see what questions you guys have, and then we'll talk about how do a bit of an introduction with the questionnaires and kind of get started into what it is that the data analysis does that we're focusing on this week. So as far as our weekly assignments go, because they're quite topical for the week, you should have time quite easily within it to run the analyses. They're small analyses. I'm not asking you to do big things because I'm more focused on getting you practice at actually doing it when we're in the live sessions, and then also giving you something that's just the same as what we go through in the live session to do on your own. And you're always more than welcome to work with each other on that. So there will be a podcast each week that connects to the topic, like this week's, and then we'll follow up then in class with the live demonstration, any questions you might have from the podcast, and then go through everything. And then the weekly assignments are basic. They're set up like a test, but it's just because that means that as soon as the assignment closes the next morning, so the assignments all close Friday night, Saturday morning you can see how you guys did. You may want to mute your microphones unless you're going to chat, because there might be a little bit of echo that comes up. So I mean, if you have a question, just pipe in, but otherwise that way, if you're typing or if anything happens, we don't get any feedback on it, which might be less exciting. So the live session exercises, the exercises are all due for Fridays by midnight, like I said, and same as always with everything. So let me get into the modules each week. We'll have this kind of a setup that you can see. So this week, obviously, hopefully everyone, was everyone able to download the SPSS either through the requested version or through the link that I set up? Anyone have trouble with that? Yeah, and sometimes...
Yeah, I managed to do it.
What's up?
I think I managed to download it, I think.
Cool. Well, and the license, because it's a university license, it doesn't really matter if it's the one that I've received, that you guys have received. It's all part of the regular licensing. So the podcasts will be here, and there will also be a weekly data file. It's all that same project that I gave you guys in the sample brief, but I've just cut out a lot of the data files quite large in terms of the number of variables, and it just kind of confuses everything. So each week there will be a shortened version of the data file for you to download. If you have any problems, let me know. And then as far as the guidance goes, so this week's will look like pretty much everything else. There'll be a quick overview and then the steps that you should be taking. This is basically just a reminder of what we'll go through in the live exercise, but it's so that as you're doing it, until you get used to the program and where all the menus are and everything, that's probably the hardest part of getting these set up to run. And so I'll include the drop-down menus, and then you go to the assessment in order to start the so-called quiz. But it's just so that you can have the answers. So in terms of this module, the weekly exercises all get averaged together like normal, and then your lowest one dropped. But those are 60% of the classes, the weighting in the class. So it's important that you do them and get through them. Then the 40% of the module comes from a critical reflection on how you think you've done to meet the assignment objectives. So in terms of thinking about what the purpose of this is, when you guys see polls reported, for example, in the news, there's always a single question. Do you think that the government is doing a great job managing COVID virus, yes or no? And those are interesting, but in general, they're not what we would consider in research to be reliable and valid, because what would a great job be? Is it preventing number of deaths? Is it effectively communicating with the public? Is it getting enforcement of measures that they've taken? It could be all of those, or in people's minds it could just be one or two of those. So the problem with most polls is that they ask these kind of broad judgment questions. Now, if it's a question of, would you vote for this party or that party, that's pretty straightforward. But when you're talking about evaluations, asking people to say, is something good, is something bad, or how would you consider it, you need to make sure that everyone's thinking in the same direction. So my definition would be the same as your definition. I just can't assume that as a researcher. Last semester, and normally when I do this, actually let's back that up. So if I say, what is love? What could that mean? Like, how would you define love? That's an actual question. Could we say, I love my dog? Of course. I would hope that would mean something different than if I say I love my husband, or I love my friends, or I love my siblings if I have them. This becomes the challenge in research, is if you give people some kind of vague notion that we all kind of know once we understand the context, but if you're talking about these kind of concepts, you need to get at them and figure out if we're all coming at it from the same perspective. So that's why we tend to ask multiple questions. So, for example, if we're talking about how people like their grocery shopping, what do you do when you go grocery shopping? Well, the simple answer to the grocery shopping question is that we go, we pick some stuff up, we see what's in. Sometimes some of us look for good deals, some of us don't. But if you're trying to understand people's shopping behaviors, that kind of fuzziness doesn't help for identifying different behaviors, what will influence people's attitudes, what will influence people's behaviors. So, for example, if you have all these questions that are all really about asking what are your attitudes towards grocery shopping, how do we know what each one of these? Now, we could report and we could run different analyses for each one of these questions, but that's also inefficient, and it can lead to errors, because how do you make sense if someone, if the time or has any relationship to how many stores that they visit, or whether people look for things on sale. This becomes the trickier thing to try and digest. So to make the research more reliable than say a poll that asks, so how would you rate the government's response to COVID, or how do you think that the government is doing on health and social care? Proper research is about making more specific recommendations and more concrete recommendations. In a PR context, this can make the difference between a message being successful or unsuccessful. So this week I've had a chat with the Royal Society for Public Health and trying to figure out in a long-term sense how to reach out to people who are vaccine resistant. So kind of about COVID, but beyond COVID, how do we try and figure out for the minority of people who aren't interested in getting vaccinations, how do you make sure that folks can actually get what they need, and that we can prevent pandemics or potentially emergent pandemics? So,
Audra,
yeah.
is there any way you can zoom in on the screen, just because we can't really read the writing?
Oh, let's see. I think that you know what I can do is I can open that up in the Word document. This one. It'll take a second because it's kind of a weird file. And then I can zoom in. But so when you're talking about being precise while this opens, when you're talking about trying to be really precise, this ends up being part of the trick, is how can you be really precise about all of this in trying to make judgments, and it makes a difference potentially between someone getting a vaccine and not. In a commercial sense, it can make the difference between profitability or the successful launch of a campaign and not. And that one is quite slow in opening. Let me pop into... I have so many things running that's getting a bit... because these are the same questions, just not in a pretty version of it. So, window. View. Do I have a zoom option? And you may need to maximize it on the screen. Here we come. Let me get to that section. Here we go. View. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
If you open up your SPSS file, you will also find the same ones are the first 23 questions. So you can look there as well. This is just a slightly prettier version of that. And we'll scroll through just so you get a sense of those. So the purpose of the factor analysis then is to determine when people are answering all these questions, which questions are they answering in the same way? We're not interested with how they answer yet, but we're trying to make sure that we have we see how questions group together. So for example, on this page that you can see, if you're looking, you can kind of see, I would rather wait to buy groceries when they're on sale. I'm likely to buy groceries that are on sale. Those two questions, and at the supermarket, I look for items that are on sale. We would expect that people should answer those quite similarly. So it's looking at slight variations in how people remember or think of their behaviors, how they do some grocery shopping. But whether that would connect then maybe with how you time your trips to the shops to coincide with when they do the markdowns in the afternoon. So if you have fresh food, like the deli food, if you go after, I think it is 2 o'clock usually in the afternoon, you'll start to see price reductions. So some people make a habit of going for those kinds of foods when the price reductions start to hit. Or they go first thing in the morning because yesterday's bakery items will be on price reduction. So, but is that the same thing as people who generally look for sale items whenever they happen to go? That we don't know. So this is what the factor analysis does, is to ask, all of these are asking really about whether or not various degrees to which people look for bargains and how they look for price reduced food at the grocery store. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they all group together. And so what we're trying to do is simplify the analysis, but have really valid and reliable measures of it. So when we actually go into SPSS, when you open SPSS up, you get your data file, which looks something like this, and there are two views. So this is the variable view that gives you the list of all the questions. When it opens up, you might automatically get the data view, which looks like this. Neither one of them, this is less useful because these are, all of the rows are individual respondents. So if the first person, this is how they answered all these questions. And we don't tend to, if you're trying to look at all of these like that, it just gives you, there's too much to try and take in. And there's no way for us to kind of eyeball it and say, well, yeah, that is totally consistent or not. That's why we run the tests. Most of the time, I just ignore the data view, and I'll use the variable view because it at least lists the questions. So the other file that automatically opens up when you're in SPSS is this output file. It's pretty well empty at the beginning, because what this does is everything that you run, this is where the results come up. What you'll notice though is on this header, all of this header is the exact same as when you have the data view open. So you can actually just minimize the data file and just work from this. So to run the factor analysis, the first thing you click on is Analyze. And again, this is where you get all these drop-down menus. Most of these you won't be using at all this semester because there's a lot of statistics that people can do, but they get a bit complex. We're just introducing the core ones that folks in the social sciences, in public relations, are much more likely to use. Then you come down to dimension reduction, which is just the category for it. And you go over to factor. So we're doing factor analysis, which is looking for how those variables go together. You can change the view on this so that it's a little bit easier. Now, a general rule of thumb when you're doing this, anything in SPSS, is the fewer buttons that you click, probably the better. So what you want to do, if you have a whole group of questions, so all of these are attitude to shopping, you'd put them in all together. And so if you're doing a multiple selection, you can do the control and whatever the equivalent of control is on the max, and then you can highlight these and you pop them over into the next. So you can take things back and forth. If you have one that you accidentally got in, let's say you got that one in and you didn't want it, you can deselect it quite easily. Once you have all of them over that you want, go to the only thing you need to change on the options, which are all of these are your option menus. And you can have a peek through them. What it does is it just ends up adding to the complication of your output file, and you don't really need to necessarily do that. So you go to the rotation and choose Variance. And then continue. And that's the only thing that you need to change. Then you hit OK to run it. And all this stuff pops up in your output screen. SPSS will give you a lot more information than you actually need. And there's reasons for it, but the reasons for most users are fairly irrelevant. So there are just some things that you can delete and ignore that you wouldn't have to worry about in an applied setting. So for example, this one, if you highlight the box, the communalities, just delete that. You need to leave the total variance explained, and we'll come back to this. Now in this one, you'll see that there are 5 components or 5 factors that have emerged. These are what we'll be interpreting in just a minute. But there's 2 elements to it. One is this raw one. So if you have more than just one component, you don't actually use this table to interpret because you have the rotated component matrix. Now, this again isn't math. What you're looking for are numbers that to help you interpret. So this first box on the total variance explained, SPSS already judges for you how many factors, so they have to be above a 1. So if you take a look at this total, you will end up getting only the factors that actually matter. And that's just a judgment, a mathematical judgment that's automatically made based on statistics convention and a lot of stuff behind that. You will ultimately report the information on this screen in terms of the total, the percent of variance. It's asking how much does this account for the different ways that people answered questions. So the higher the number, generally the better. And that's about as much as you need to deal with on that. But when you look at the rotated component matrix, this is actually the important part. What this is a measure of how these variables connect together. So the simple rule of thumb is that a 0.6 or above in the columns. So you don't look across on the rows. You look only at the columns. So a 0.6 and above is something that would be considered potentially a combination. 0.7 and above is ultimately a better idea, but 0.6 gives you at least something to work with. So if we only look at this first column, what we can start to see is how things have grouped together. So for example, if you look here, if we look only for the numbers that are 0.6 and above, so the attitude to shopping, I chose the supermarket because of the potential to buy reduced price food, is a 0.74. The next one down is 0.84. And this is also something to note, that we only report things to 2 decimal places. And that's just a matter of convention. There's no necessary reason for it. So we have all of these 4 in a row. So the attitude, I chose the supermarket all the way down to I know what I want to buy when I go shopping for price reduced food. Those all hang together. But then we look down in our list and then, another one. I visit more than one store to target reduced priced food. Then we look and see if any others do. And you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the list, and here we have another one. I regularly go to multiple supermarkets to get the best price on different food items, as well as this very last one. What this is telling us, and the best way to interpret this, is that on all of these questions that are at the 0.6 or above, people answered them very similarly. So if I answered a 1 on all of these, or on one of these, so if I answered a 1 on I typically time my grocery store to coincide with when price reductions are made, I probably answered a 1 on most of those others as well. Does that make sense? If not, let me know. So then part of this is doing a bit of logical deduction and taking a look at these questions and asking, well, what is the common denominator between all of these? So this is, someone who goes to the grocery store when things are going to be on sale. They go to the supermarket with the best, multiple supermarkets for the best prices. Then we come back up. They visit more than one. They are always looking for it. They're looking for reduced priced food. They time it for reductions. They go to particular supermarkets because of that. So that's telling you that these are bargain shoppers. This is a measure of bargain shopping, I should say. So we know that whether or not people do these behaviors or not, they're pretty consistent. So part of interpreting what's happening on the factor analysis is looking at the common thread in any of the questions. And when you look at that, and that makes sense. So this is all about logic, and can you put things together logically? So what is the common kind of judgment that you make? So this isn't really where it ends. So we have to figure out if this tells us that people are responding consistently. But then the next step of that is to try and figure out if then these are reliable. And that's what the Cronbach's alpha does. It's a second test that we would use in order to really verify that what we have is a valuable, reliable kind of a concept. That bargain shopping, if we say all of these questions hang together as bargain shopping, then they actually do. So once we've identified which variables, we do a second analysis, which is the reliability analysis. And that's for Cronbach's alpha. Now, we want to make sure that we get all of them. Usually I write these down on the side, especially if I have a long list, but we'll see if I remember all of them. And if not, give me a hand. Okay, so it starts with the fourth one down. So I choose that. We go the next one. I time. I go specifically. I know what I want to buy. I visit more than one. And then we went down to, and I can't scroll down, which is let's see, I think this one. There was another one that down at the bottom of the list. If you guys ran it, could you do a double check for me? I can also cancel that real quick. Hold on. Let's write down the two that are at the bottom so that I know. Okay, it's the timing bottom and the regularly go to multiple supermarkets. Okay, so we go back to that. Our scale for the reliability analysis. Shift that over. And so we go that one, that one, that one, that one. Not those two. I choose. So we just double check. I time. I specifically go. I know what I want to buy. I visit more than one, and then we had the bottom one, and then the multiple supermarkets. And we bump those over here. Then on the Cronbach alpha, when we click open the options under the statistics, what we want is the information for the item, the scale, and the scale if item deleted. And those are the only options that you would choose there. Click continue, and you click OK. Now the first thing on here that you look at is this reliability statistic. To interpret this, anything that is at the 0.7 level or above is a highly reliable statistic. So for our bargain shopping, the Cronbach alpha at a 0.91 is a really reliable measure. So that says that not only do people tend to answer those all the same, but it's not by accident. For the item statistics, you can look at those, but the more important bit is this Cronbach's alpha if item deleted, this last column here. Because what this will tell you is whether your alpha score would go up or down if you took one of those items out of the scale. Now, when you have something that's a really strong reliability, say like this 0.91, you don't want to take anything out. But let's say you were on the borderline. Let's say you had an alpha of a 0.68. You would look at this list to see if there was one question that just wasn't working with the others based on how people tend to respond across your whole sample. So on here we can actually see that yes, this next to the bottom question would slightly make it go up from a 0.91 to a 0.92, but that's not really giving you any valuable gain when you're already at a strong one. So now we know that we have a bargain shopping kind of a variable. If you were doing your data analysis, instead of then going through and running any further tests with these 7 questions as individual questions, what this tells you is that you can condense these into a single variable, into a single item that you can run your tests for. So if we call this our bargain shopping variable, we know that we have asked the question in a number of different ways, and so we have something that's quite stable. This is better than a one-off. It's more valid and reliable than any single one of these on their own. So if I'm going to create a new variable that is called bargain shopping, the way that I do this in SPSS would be to go to transform, and then we would go to compute variable. And let's bring this over here so that we can see our list. You click all, and then you go through you find mean. What this is basically going to let you do is take the average response across these 7 questions that every single person has made. So let's say the average response for me for this, if I was not a bargain shopper, might be a 1.2. So on most of the questions I said 1, and 1 or 2 of them I said a 2. So it's taking that average and it's giving each one a new score so that condenses all of them. So I would put into the information the target variable of bargain. You want to keep these quite short, but then you put in a better label. So you would go attitude to shopping, bargain shopper. The more specific your labels, I think it just makes it easier. And you hit continue. Then this is quite picky in the way that it wants it put in. Take out the dafty question marks. It's telling you what the format should be. So these were, let's see, we put in our, I choose the supermarket was our first one. No commas or no spaces. You put in a comma in between them. So you highlight it. I time my shopping trips. You move it over and you put a comma. No spaces or anything else, or it just won't run it. Let's see. One store. And this is where it's important to keep things pretty consistent throughout. And then we go to regular multiple supermarkets and timing the grocery store. And you click OK. Now what this has done is in our data file, so we go back to our variable view, and notice this very last one, it always puts it on the very bottom. We have our new variable of attitude to shopping, bargain shopper. So that's the full process from the factor analysis on through to the Cronbach's alpha, and then into computing the new variable. Now, obviously this week we're not worrying about any of the other tests. We're just focusing on this process. Now, that's only for the first of the 4. So we go back to our factor analysis. Now, in the SPSS viewer, on this left-hand column, you have each of the big tests that it's run. So the reliability, if you click on there, it's a way of shortcutting the navigation. So we go back to our factor analysis. So we have dealt with this very first one. But we still have 2 through 5 to take a look at. So we would follow the same process. And what you'll notice is that there will not be any questions that are above a 0.6 in 2 different columns. So, for example, one of ours was the attitude to shopping. It was a 0.74 here, but it's a 0.36 here, or 0.75 to 0.36. Also low on the next column, the next column, and the next column. So this, you won't ever see any overlap. And that's an important point to make, is that every one of our questions is only going to fall into a single category. So on the second component, take a look and be looking at the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th. We're not going to go through the whole process on the converting for the Cronbach's alpha or computing the new variable. But just to make sure that you're comfortable and confident in interpreting this. So if we look under the second component, we start to see this. I look for the item when you're actually at the supermarket that's on sale. I like to buy groceries. I'm likely to buy groceries that are on sale. What else comes up? You have a couple that are in the 0.5s. Those aren't going to be helpful. This is an important one. This negative number. You only include the positive numbers. So if it's a negative number, you would ignore that. So really, we only have 2 questions on the second group that fit together. So, and those 2 make sense, that it's I look for groceries that are on sale, and I'm likely to buy them. What doesn't fit then is that first question, which is, I'd rather wait to buy groceries when they're on sale. So it's not that people will only buy the groceries that are on sale most of the time that fits with these other 2. It's more that we're opportunistic sale lookers. So we'll look we'll pick things up that are on a bargain. It's just not that we're going out of our way to do it. And that's where you want to look at in terms of the connection between them. In the third column, take a quick look. We'll go through it. Note the questions that you think fit in, and then when we go through, see if you got them right. So on this third column, again, we're looking for 0.60 and above. So as you are looking at that, the only questions that then group together are, I like to browse. I often buy groceries, particular products on the spur of the moment. And if it's a sale, it's probably something I wouldn't ordinarily buy. And sometimes I buy stuff that's on sale that I don't necessarily need. And again, this is even more of an opportunistic sale buyer. These are the folks who, ooh, that's on sale, I could use that. And the question then, later in the survey, this becomes interesting because it's about the question of what happens with food waste. Do people actually waste the food that they buy? And in the UK, actually, that's quite a big problem. That the amount of food wasted that goes off in people's refrigerators, what have you, we, along with a lot of Western countries, are quite bad for that here. And in part of the challenge is that people will opportunistically buy, but then they don't ever do anything with it. So, as you've had a look at the other ones, you can start to see that they get a little bit sparser. And this is because in order, if we look up here, these are the bigger, the first few components are the ones that are the most powerful. And so a lot of times they're the ones that include the most number of variables. And so on here, we have a component that comes up. Make sure there's no others. With these three questions, the 0.72, 0.79, and 0.78, which is I'm concerned about price, but I also want quality, best value for money, and checking prices for value for money. So these are value shoppers, that they want quality, but they also want to make sure they're getting a good price. So they're the folks who on the price listing might look at the cost per item. And so if you have a bigger item, so you can get a 32 ounce thing of HP sauce versus the small one, the bigger one gives you usually a better price per ounce. So that's the kind of person that those folks are. And then the last one looks like just these two variables. Yes. Just these two variables. I only go shopping when I need to buy something, and I always shop with a list. The colloquially I like to call them the search and destroy kind of shopping. So whether people are or aren't, do or don't fit into these categories, it's because they're answering the questions consistently. And that is as far as the interpretation goes. A lot of times when people come to factor analysis, they're saying, oh, well, there's so many people who are bargain shoppers. That's not what this test is telling you. This test is just saying, how do these ideas fit together so that we can test them later? Are there questions about this or how to interpret it? So what you guys are going to be doing, since there aren't any questions, what you guys are going to be doing is you're going to be doing this analysis on the beliefs and values. So you will be doing exactly the same process, but looking at different people's beliefs and values. So that was on page, I think, 7. Oh, but this was easier for you guys to see. So let's find those really quick. This is a more general kind of a measure looking at how do people what kinds of values do people identify with? So this isn't actually about grocery shopping. This is a test that we would use if we wanted to really understand, is there something about people's attitudes, their beliefs that influences some of their shopping behaviors? So there are really different kinds of values that might come up here. So as people were taking it, they're asking how strongly it opposes to strongly similar to your values they are. So do you care about social power, wealth, authority, influence, equality, peace? So the question is, these are covering some really different kinds of concepts. And it's just these on this page. So how do these fit together? That's the question that with your exercise this week that you'll be answering. But the other thing that I wanted to show you for the factor analysis is that, remember I said sometimes if there's only one factor that emerges, it looks a little bit different. This sometimes throws folks off. So I wanted to come into this measure, which is a reputational measure, or a social responsibility measure of Aldi. And this is asking, do people, when they think of Aldi, do they think about all these different aspects of social responsibility similarly or differently? So when we talk about the concept of social responsibility, people will often talk about it as an environmental issue. It as, do organizations take care of their employees? Do they care about their communities, their society? People could evaluate the social responsibility of a company quite differently. Some companies may be amazing environmentally, but terrible to their employees. So when we talk about social responsibility, we want to make sure that when we've asked these questions, that people are responding, and how they're responding and thinking. Do they think of all of this the same with Aldi or not? So when we do the factor analysis, now just a quick note, the SPSS remembers the last test that you ran if you're working on a bunch of tests all at the same time. The disadvantage to this is that you have to kick out all the variables that you had included in the first place, but the bonus of it is that it remembers all the selections over here that you had made. So you don't have to go back in and reselect any of the options that you had. So if we're doing the Aldi one, bump those over, run that, and maximize that. It also adds your last test on to the bottom of the output file. And the output file you can save and should save to come back to. So again, we get rid of this one. But notice here on the component matrix and the rotated matrix, there isn't anything under the rotated component matrix. And a lot of folks will be confused the first time that they see that why didn't it run right? It did run right. It's just that when there's only one matrix, it doesn't have to shift anything. Now this tells you, if you look at all of these are well above 0.7. All of them are well above a 0.9. That when people were responding to this question, they had a uniform view of how they saw Aldi in terms of social responsibility. So if you ask them broadly, is Aldi socially responsible? They're answering basically the same as if they're thinking about Aldi and the environment, their employees, society, and the shoppers. That no matter whether that's good, neutral, or really bad, it's all the same kind of view. So you can treat that then, you would treat that as just Aldi's social responsibility score. And then you could run, if we run our scale, you would see what that means is that it'll come out with a very high Cronbach alpha. Now, on the statistics, just to show you, see how our items, scale and scale if item deleted, are all checked for us? That's why we don't have to worry in the same data session. Now, if you close out the program, it doesn't remember those options. You have to do that every time. But as long as your program is open, it remembers those. So notice the reliability statistics. The highest number that you can have is a 1.0 on this statistic. So it is functionally rounded up to a 1. So that means that pretty much people were responding to those all consistently. So, when you go to save this, you want to save these, and you can save them anywhere, just like you would on your computer anywhere you want. Oh. I have so many things open that my computer's running a wee bit slow. So if I were going to put those in my data file, pick your folder, put it in, and there you go. So when we come back to your homework, your exercise that you're doing for this week, you'll be running, I'm asking you to run the factor analysis and the reliability analysis. For the exercise itself, I'm not having you run the compute the new variable, but you'll need to know how to do that in order to do next week's work. So make sure that you practice that so that you can get to that stage of being ready so that you have, for example, your bargain shopper. Because next week, what you'll do is you'll practice, we'll reinforce all the factor analysis, and then you'll run your test to interpret. So when you get ready to do that, you just click into the week 2 assignment. If you have a little bit of time today, and this is really what we would be doing anyhow in our lab, is if you have time today, then you could click in to the assignment, run your data analysis first. Once you have that, and you have your output folder, then you can click in. If anyone's going to do that now, I'll close out the YouTube live streaming because that would be quite boring, but I'll leave this meeting open for the next hour or so if you do that now. And so yes, the call recording will be put onto my Beckett as well. So the YouTube live stream is what I will copy and paste into it, and I'll paste that link in so that you can have access to that. So I'll leave this meeting, the Skype meeting open. I'll close out the YouTube live stream because we don't need the demonstration anymore. But if you need help in the next hour, I'm happy to stick around on the Skype meeting if you want to take a run at it, and if you have questions, then you can pipe in. I will probably mute my microphone so you don't hear the machine gun of any typing going, but I'll be around. Any other questions? And yeah, you can type them in or you can ask them. Yeah, the data file. Olivia, if that's what you mean, the data file, yeah, you'll be using exactly this one. So this is the one that is in your, this is this week's data file. If you download from this link, you will get this file. And that's also in the Skype meeting. I think you should see that file link there too. If you look up into the text of the meeting. Let me double check. Let me open the Skype back up. Into the conversation. View. Chat. That's what I'm after. Yes. So if you go into the chat view, you'll be able to download that directly from there, or you can have it here. It's the same file, so that is the same one. And so when you open it up, you'll just get this clean log. I can also put this up, this output file up for you guys as a little bit of a follow-up from this. The license manager name, that should be all of your license. If you use this license code, if that's what you mean, that should let you license it without a hassle. Okay, I'm going to stop the live streaming now from the YouTube.